Hello and welcome. Take a moment to adjust your pillow, pull up the blankets, and dim the lights down low. If you enjoy slipping into history's most bizarre corners to help you unwind, go ahead and drop a quick like, hit subscribe, and leave a comment with your location and local time down below. Tonight, we are journeying into a realm of history that schoolbooks usually gloss over: the dirtiest jobs of Tudor England, the dark ink of ancient mummies, the endless mental torture of Celtic Druid apprentices, and the paranoid dining rooms of medieval royalty. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let yourself sink into the dark, damp dawn of the 16th century. The morning air in the year 1538 does not greet you with gentle warmth or the tranquil chirping of birds. It greets you with the heavy, stagnant chill of a Tudor palace before the hearth fires have been fully stoked, accompanied by the distinct smell of wet wool, burning tallow, and the unmistakable, lingering stench of royal bodily functions. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress in a small, drafty alcove nestled just off the royal bedchamber. You don't have the luxury of rolling over and going back to sleep, because the gentleman sleeping in the four-poster velvet bed a few yards away happens to be King Henry VIII, and His Majesty's royal digestive tract is already rumbling. You are the Groom of the Stool, arguably the most influential, highly paid, and deeply unfortunate man in the English court. While the rest of the kingdom imagines the king's closest advisors to be high-ranking dukes discussing foreign diplomacy or military strategy, you know the absolute truth. The real power in England is brokered sitting directly over a velvet-lined wooden box equipped with a pewter basin. Your eyes open to the gray twilight filtering through the leaded glass windows of Hampton Court. The morning routine begins not with a crisp breeze or a peaceful moment of reflection, but with the sharp realization that you must immediately assess the monarch's physical condition before he even sets his feet upon the floorboard. You swing your legs out from under your scratchy wool blanket and stand up, your joints aching from the damp river cold blowing off the Thames. You don't wear silk pajamas or comfortable robes. You dress rapidly in heavy doublet and hose, brushing a stray fleck of lint off your sleeve, because looking pristine while handling royal waste is an essential part of your high-status dignity. Before you touch the royal velvet, you must tend to your own basic hygiene, which in Tudor England is less about water and soap and more about masking the overwhelming realities of human existence. Washing your entire body with water is considered by the finest medical minds of the era to be a deadly gamble. Water opens the pores, and open pores allow the foul, pestilent miasmas of the air to seep straight into your vital organs, corrupting your humors and bringing forth sudden death. So, you strictly limit your morning cleansing to wiping your face and hands with a damp linen cloth kept in a brass bowl. You dry your skin vigorously with a piece of dry rag, ensuring no moisture remains to invite plague into your bloodstream. To handle the breath that could strip the paint off a cathedral wall, you pop a small clove into your mouth, chewing down on the bitter, spicy spice to numb your tongue and sweeten your breath. You scrub your teeth with a small piece of rough linen wrapped around your index finger, dipped into a mixture of powdered cuttlebone, burned rosemary, and salt. It tastes overwhelmingly salty and gritty, scraping against your gums, but it leaves your mouth feeling somewhat scrubbed of last night's ale and boiled mutton. You round off your morning preparations by sprinkling a few drops of rosewater across your collar and rubbing a greasy dab of pomade, made from rendered pig fat, crushed lavender, and musk, into your hair to keep the lice from settling too comfortably into your scalp. Now sanitized to 16th century standards, you step quietly into the royal chamber. The king is beginning to stir, grunting heavily as he turns over under his massive velvet quilts. Henry is in his mid-40s now, no longer the slender, athletic prince of his youth, but a towering, increasingly heavy monarch, plagued by an agonizing leg ulcer that refuses to heal. The room smells heavily of vinegar, burnt herbs, and the sharp copper tang of suppurating wounds. Your primary duty this morning is not to debate the dissolution of the monasteries or the threat of a Spanish invasion, but to manage the close stool. The close stool is a masterpiece of Tudor carpentry and luxury furniture design. It is a stout wooden chest covered in rich crimson velvet, studded with polished brass nails and lined with soft ribbon fringe. Inside sits a removable pewter pot, thoroughly cleaned by lower-class servants whom you would never dream of acknowledging. Your job, however, is not the grunt work of carrying the pot away once it is full. That is reserved for the lowest scullery boys. Your job is the intimate, sacred act of assisting the King of England during his most vulnerable moments, providing soft linen cloths, ensuring his comfort, and inspecting the royal yield for any sign of illness that could destabilize the nation. You gently approach the bed, clear your throat with a soft, practiced cough, and pull back the heavy bed curtains. The king sits up, groaning aloud as he swings his swollen legs over the side of the bed. You immediately bow low, extending a warm wool cloak to wrap around his broad shoulders. He settles onto the padded seat of the velvet close stool with a deep sigh of relief. While the king sits upon his throne of velvet and pewter, you stand at a respectful angle, holding a stack of fine bleached linen cloths in one hand and a silver flask of scented warm water in the other. This is the moment where historical power is truly exercised, because you are the only human being in the entire realm permitted to be alone with the king during his most private moments. Everyone in the court wants to be your best friend. Dukes, ambassadors, cardinals, and poets have spent the last week slipping gold coins into your purse, begging you to whisper a favorable word into the king's ear while he sits on the stool. As Henry stares blankly at the tapestries on the wall, wincing from the pain in his leg, he mutters a question about the weather outside. You answer softly, keeping your tone soothing and deferential, subtly mentioning that the Earl of Essex seemed particularly devoted to His Majesty's cause during yesterday's council. Henry grunts in approval, absorbing the suggestion in the quiet solitude of the chamber. It is a surreal dynamic. You are performing a job that modern minds would consider the ultimate humiliation. Yet in the political landscape of 1538, you are one of the most feared and influential men in Great Britain. When the monarch has completed his business, your most critical analytical task begins. You do not simply hand him the linen and look away. As the groom of the stool, you are required by royal custom to carefully inspect the contents of the pewter bowl. In Tudor medical theory, human waste is the single most accurate map of the body's balance of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. You peer into the vessel, analyzing the color, consistency, and smell with the intense focus of a modern pathologist examining a laboratory culture. Is the output overly dark, suggesting a dangerous excess of black bile and a spiraling melancholy? Is it liquid and pale, indicating a cold, phlegmatic stomach that failed to properly digest last night's roasted peacock? You mentally record every detail to report to the royal physicians later in the morning. Reassured that His Majesty is not on the verge of sudden dysentery, you hand over the soft linen cloths, assist him in rising, and step back to allow the junior attendants to rush in and carry the pewter vessel away to be emptied into the royal cesspool below. With the first major hurdle of the morning completed, it is time for the king to be dressed, and you must supervise the elaborate process. Dressing the King of England is an athletic event involving 6 different people and multiple layers of heavy, stiffened textiles. You stand by, directing the bedchamber servants as they haul out the day's wardrobe. A shirt of fine white linen embroidered with gold thread at the collar, a stiffened wool doublet lined with satin, heavy velvet breeches padded with horsehair to create a formidable silhouette, and thick silk hose pulled tightly up his calves. You personally fasten the gold buttons down the front of his doublet, your hands nimble as you dodge the sharp, heavy gemstone rings adorning his fingers. The king is moody this morning. The throbbing pain in his leg ulcer makes every movement a trial. As you pull his leather boots on, he lets out a sharp curse that echoes off the stone walls, kicking his foot back slightly. You take the blow without a word, bowing low, offering a quiet apology for touching a tender spot, and carrying on. In this court, a single mistake or a display of irritation can land you in the Tower of London before lunchtime. Once the king is fully dressed, laced, and scented, he moves toward the great hall for his morning prayer and light breakfast. You follow 3 paces behind, maintaining your position of ultimate proximity. The corridors of Hampton Court are already buzzing with life. Servants rush past carrying bundles of firewood. Courtly suitors lean against the carved oak paneling, waiting to hand petitions to anyone of importance, and the smell of roasting meat begins to waft up from the subterranean kitchens. Breakfast for the high nobility is not a modest bowl of oatmeal or a piece of buttered toast. As you stand behind the king's chair in the private dining chamber, a procession of servants presents the morning spread. There are platters of cold-boiled beef, roasted capons swimming in heavy pewter dishes, salted herring, poached eggs sprinkled with nutmeg, and thick slices of dense white manchet bread. To wash it all down, there is no coffee, tea, or orange juice. Such things do not exist in Tudor England. Instead, the king drinks freshly brewed ale, light and slightly sweet, served in a carved silver goblet. You do not eat yet. Your role during mealtime is to watch, serve, and protect. You cut the king's meat into small manageable pieces using a horn-handled knife, ensuring that no bones or gristle offend his palate. You watch his hand closely. When his ale goblet empties, you signal the cupbearer immediately. As you watch him chew through a slice of salted beef, your own stomach lets out a loud, embarrassing rumble. The king glances back at you over his shoulder, a slight, wicked smirk playing on his lips. He tosses a chunk of tough leftover crust from his bread plate onto your silver serving tray. It is an act of supreme royal generosity, and you accept it with a low bow and a murmured blessing. While the king finishes his breakfast, your mind drifts to the sheer absurdity of your position. You are a knight of the realm, a man of noble blood and vast landholdings in your own right, yet you spend your mornings analyzing royal waste and catching discarded bread crusts. But the rewards are staggering. You are given free lodgings in the palace, access to the finest imported wines, direct control over who gets an audience with the king, and a handsome salary that makes you richer than 99% of the population. However, the job carries a physical and psychological cost that slowly grinds you down. The stress is constant. If the king contracts a sudden bowel infection and dies, you will be the first person suspected of poisoning him or failing in your duty of care. If he grows tired of your face or suspects you of leaking court secrets heard during his stool sessions, you can lose your lands, your freedom, and your head in a single afternoon. The king suddenly pushes his plate away, standing up with a heavy thud of his boots. It is time for his morning walk through the privy gardens, followed by an audience with his privy council. He motions for you to stay behind to oversee the thorough cleaning and re-preparation of his personal chambers. As the king sweeps out of the room, surrounded by his guards and secretaries, you let out a long, slow breath, leaning against the cold stone fireplace for just a moment to rest your aching legs. Your morning duties as groom of the stool are far from over, but the day's horrors are only beginning to unfold. You must now inspect the lower quarters of the palace to ensure the palace hygiene standards are being maintained, which brings you into direct contact with the weirdest, dirtiest, and most stomach-churning professions in the Tudor realm. Leaving the relative luxury of the royal apartments, you descend the narrow spiral staircase that leads down to the service corridors. The air grows noticeably colder, damp, and thick with the heavy stench of soot, stale grease, and unwashed human bodies. Down here, hundreds of lower-class laborers work continuously to keep the massive machine of the royal court functioning. Your first stop in the lower courtyard is to check on the palace water supply and drainage systems. As you step out into the gray, misty courtyard, you nearly trip over a ragged, shivering figure sitting on the edge of a muddy puddle. The man is wearing nothing but a pair of torn linen trousers, rolled up above his knees. His bare legs covered in a horrific mosaic of swollen, writhing, dark purple creatures. This is the Palace Leech Collector. If you thought your job of inspecting royal feces was unpleasant, a single glance at this man will instantly make you reevaluate your life choices. The Leech Collector is a contracted laborer brought in to supply the royal physicians with fresh medicinal bloodsuckers. In the Tudor worldview, when a noble or a king suffers from inflammation, fever, or an excess of blood humor, the fastest way to restore health is to attach living leeches to their skin to draw out the bad blood. But those leeches have to come from somewhere, and they don't just harvest themselves. You stand over the Leech Collector, pulling your scented handkerchief up over your nose to block the smell of swamp mud and rotting blood. You ask him how the morning's harvest has gone. The man looks up at you with hollow, exhausted eyes, his skin pale and translucent from chronic blood loss. He explains in a raspy whisper that he spent 4 hours before dawn wading knee-deep through the freezing, stagnant bogs of the Thames marshes. The methodology of a Tudor leech collector is brutally simple. They do not use nets, traps, or bait lines. Those cost money and are inefficient. Instead, the collector uses his own bare legs as live human bait. He rolls up his trousers, steps into the murky black bog water, and slowly sloshes around to disturb the mud. The vibrations and the warmth of his blood draw the leeches out from the reeds. Within minutes, dozens of wild Hirudo medicinalis swim toward his skin. Latching onto his feet, calves and thighs with 3 tooth-lined jaws, injecting a natural anesthetic so he barely feels the bite, followed by a natural anticoagulant to keep his blood flowing freely. The collector leaves them attached, feeding on his flesh until they become completely engorged, swelling to 10 times their original weight, transforming from slender ribbons into thick, glistening sausage-like sacs of dark blood. Once they are full, they naturally drop off his legs into the cold water, or he gently scrapes them off with an old butter knife, dropping them one by one into a damp clay pot filled with wet moss. You bend down slightly to peer into his earthenware jar. Inside, hundreds of shiny black slimy bodies squirm over one another in a squelching mass. The collector shows you his legs. They are covered in hundreds of tiny Y-shaped bleeding scars, some fresh and oozing, others old, purple, and infected from the filthy bog water. Because the leeches inject an anticoagulant, the collector's legs continue to trickle blood long after he leaves the marsh. His leather shoes are soaked through with his own dark crimson blood. He earns a few copper pennies for a jar full of prime bloodsuckers, barely enough to buy a loaf of coarse rye bread and a pot of sour ale. The royal physicians will take these exact leeches, wash them off in warm rosewater, and apply them to the delicate skin of high-ranking lords, or even the king himself to cure a headache, a gout flare-up, or a skin rash. You shake your head, tossing the poor collector a small silver groat out of pure pity. He catches it with trembling mud-caked fingers and mutters a breathless thank you before pulling another hungry leech off his ankle and sliding it into the jar. Leaving the leech collector to nurse his bleeding legs, you push open the heavy oak door leading into the palace scullery and kitchens. The heat hits you like a solid wall. Massive log fires roar inside deep brick fireplaces where whole oxen and dozens of pigs turn slowly on iron spits. The noise is deafening, iron pots clanging, butchers chopping through heavy bone, and overseers screaming orders at terrified young boys running back and forth with buckets of water. In the dark corner of the main kitchen, sitting right beside the roaring flames of the roasting pit, sits a young boy who holds one of the most dangerous and miserable jobs in Tudor society, the turnspit boy. The turnspit boy is usually an orphan or a pauper's child, no older than 7 or 8 years old. His sole purpose in existence is to sit next to the blistering heat of the spit fireplace for 10 to 12 hours a day. continuously, turning a heavy iron crank that rotates the meat over the open flames so it cooks evenly. You watch the boy for a moment. His face is blackened with soot, his hair singed short from flying sparks, and his clothes dripping with sweat. The skin on the right side of his face and arm, the side facing the fire, is bright red and covered in painful peeling heat blisters. If he stops turning the crank for even 2 minutes, the meat on one side will burn, ruining a dinner fit for nobility, and the master chef will beat him soundly with a thick wooden spoon or a leather strap. To make matters worse, the heat is so intense that turnspit boys frequently suffer from severe dehydration, heat stroke, and eye damage from staring into the roaring embers all day long. In later generations, society will eventually replace these boys with a specialized breed of small, long-bodied dogs called turnspit dogs, who run inside a wooden wheel connected to the spit. But today, in 1538, human labor is cheaper than feeding a dog. So this small, soot-covered child spends his entire youth roasting beside the flames, smelling delicious dripping fat that he will never be allowed to taste. You hand the kitchen master a written checklist for the king's evening feast, reminding him that all silver platters must be thoroughly scoured with sand and vinegar to prevent any sour residues from tainting the royal food. As you turn to leave the stifling kitchen, you notice a strange, faint odor drifting up through the flagstones of the floorboards, a heavy, sweet, sulfurous smell that instantly makes your gorge rise. You have reached the territory of the gong farmer, while you, as groom of the stool, handle the high-class pristine aspect of the king's digestive output. The gong farmers are the men who handle the raw, unvarnished reality of an entire palace's sewage. The term gong comes from the Old English word gang, meaning to go, or a privy. A gong farmer is the person whose terrifying job it is to climb down into the deep, pitch-black underground cesspools beneath the palace outhouses and dig out human excrement by hand. Because the smell of an opened cesspool is so overwhelming that it can literally asphyxiate a person, and because the risk of fire from trapped methane gas is extremely high, Tudor law strictly dictates that gong farmers are only allowed to work at night, between the hours of 9 in the evening and 5 in the morning. They are nightmen, living on the margins of society, utterly shunned by civilized people, due to the permanent, horrific stench that clings to their clothes, hair, and skin. You walk down the stone ramps leading to the outer perimeter wall of the palace, where a crew of gong farmers is preparing their equipment for the coming night. Even in the open air, the smell surrounding these men is a weaponized wall of filth. They wear heavy leather aprons, thick greasy boots, and cloth wrapped tightly over their noses and mouths. Their daily routine is the stuff of nightmares. When night falls, they unseal the stone covers of the deep privy pits beneath the palace walls. One gong farmer is lowered down into the dark, knee-deep or waist-deep pit using a wooden bucket and a rope. Working by the dim, flickering light of a candle, carefully monitored so it doesn't ignite the methane gas trapped in the vault, he uses a broad iron shovel to scoop the liquid muck and solid waste into wooden tubs called gongs. His partner above pulls the heavy sloshing tubs up with a winch and dumps the contents into a large horse-drawn wooden barrel cart known as the gong cart. Once the cart is full, they haul the waste far outside the city or palace grounds, selling it to local farmers who use it as night soil fertilizer for crop fields, or dumping it into designated river sites away from town wells. You speak briefly to the head gong farmer, an old man whose skin looks like worn leather and whose sense of smell was completely burned out decades ago. He tells you a horrifying common hazard of his trade. Just last month, in a neighboring manor house, a young gong farmer dropped his shovel into a deep cesspit, climbed down to retrieve it without a rope, was instantly knocked unconscious by methane gas fumes, and drowned in the waste before anyone could pull him out. You give the gong farmers a wide berth, nodding in silent respect for the men who do the work that keeps the palace from drowning in its own filth. and head back toward the upper levels of the palace. The sheer contrast of human life in this era strikes you deeply. On the top floor, a king sits on a velvet-covered stool while a knight wipes his rear with fine linen. On the bottom floor, a child burns beside a fire spit, a man bleeds to catch worms, and men wade through human waste in the dark. It is now mid-morning, and your duties as groom of the stool call you back to the royal apartments. The king has finished his council meeting and is preparing for a private chapel service. But as you walk through the long gallery, your mind wanders across time and space. You begin to realize that humanity's fascination with strange professions, body modification, dark rituals, and the deep, terrifying fear of unseen hazards is not unique to Tudor England. Long before kings sat on velvet stools or gong farmers dug through night soil, humans across the globe were engaging in practices that were just as painful, mysterious, and grueling. Take, for instance, the realm of the ancient world, specifically the scorching sands of ancient Egypt over 2,000 years before King Henry VIII ever drew breath. While Tudor nobility relied on fine wools, silks, and pomades to display their high social status and divine protection, the ancient Egyptians used something far more permanent: ink, driven deep into the flesh. Imagine shifting your consciousness now, leaving the cold, damp stone walls of Hampton Court behind, and stepping out into the blinding, white-hot heat of Deir el-Medina in the year 1300 BCE. You are no longer a Tudor courtier in doublets and hose. You are standing on a sun-baked limestone cliff overlooking the Valley of the Kings. The air is dry, scorching, and smells of desert dust, dried papyrus, frankincense, and roasting emmer wheat. The sky is a cloudless, brilliant sapphire blue that burns your eyes. In this ancient village of master craftsmen and artisans, you are about to witness one of the most mysterious and deeply spiritual practices of the ancient world: the creation of sacred tattoos on the bodies of elite Egyptian priestesses and Hathor worshippers. For centuries, modern historians believed that ancient Egyptian tattoos were merely decorative, or perhaps marked lower-class dancers and concubines. But recent groundbreaking archaeological discoveries, specifically the incredible, exquisitely preserved mummies found at sites like Deir el-Medina, have completely shattered that myth. You enter a cool, dark mud brick home away from the midday heat. Sitting on a woven reed mat in the center of the room is a high-ranking priestess of Hathor, the goddess of love, joy, music, and motherhood. She sits cross-legged, bare-chested, her skin glistening with a light coating of scented lotus oil. Opposite her sits the tattoo practitioner, a skilled ritual specialist, often an elder woman who understands both the art of skin marking and the complex, dangerous magic of the underworld. The tools of the ancient Egyptian tattoo artist are deceptively simple, yet terrifyingly painful. There are no electric machines, no sterile disposable needles, and no modern anesthetics. On a small wooden tray beside the artist sit several bronze needles bound tightly together with linen thread, forming a small multi-pronged implement designed to puncture the skin repeatedly. Beside the needles rests a shallow stone palette containing the ink. The ink is made by scraping pure jet-black soot from the bottom of sacred copper incense burners, mixing it thoroughly with water, gum arabic, and sometimes a drop of breast milk or sacred animal fat to give it binding strength and spiritual purity. You watch as the artist begins her work on the priestess's skin. Unlike modern tattoos, which are often chosen for personal self-expression or aesthetic taste, every single dot, line, and symbol being carved into this priestess's body serves a profound, magical purpose. It is a permanent, living amulet, a sacred armor meant to protect the wearer in this life and guide her safely through the terrifying judgment of the afterlife. The practitioner dips the bronze needle tip into the thick black soot paste. She places her thumb firmly against the priestess's shoulder, stretching the skin tight. Then, With rapid, rhythmic tapping motions, she pierces the top layer of the skin, driving the soot deep into the dermis. The sound is a sickening, soft tapping, PKKT, PKE, PEKET, followed by the quiet, sharp intake of breath from the priestess. There is no crying out, no flinching. To show pain during a sacred tattooing ritual is to disrespect the deity being invoked. Small beads of dark red blood form instantly at the puncture sites, mixing with the black soot paste on the surface of the skin. As you look closer at the priestess's body, you see that she is already covered in a breathtaking network of ancient ink. On her neck and shoulders are intricately tattooed depictions of the Wadjet, the sacred eye of Horus, staring out at the world with eternal vigilance. This symbol is not mere decoration. It is believed to act as an unsleeping guardian, warding off the evil eye, malevolent spirits, and physical disease. Across her throat, a row of Nefer symbols, the Egyptian hieroglyph representing goodness, beauty, and happiness, is etched directly over her vocal cords. The belief is that every word she speaks or chants during religious rituals will be purified and blessed as it passes through her tattooed throat. But the most incredible and mysterious tattoos are located lower down on her body, across her lower abdomen, hips, and thighs. Here, the artist is carefully tapping out a complex geometric net pattern composed of hundreds of tiny, dark blue and black dots. This tattoo network across the belly is specifically designed to protect the priestess during the most dangerous journey an ancient woman could undertake: pregnancy and childbirth. In a world without modern medicine or antibiotics, childbirth was a terrifying gamble where a massive percentage of mothers died of infection or hemorrhage. The dotted net pattern tattooed over the womb is a physical representation of the protective fishing nets used by the goddess Isis to gather the scattered pieces of her husband Osiris. As the priestess's belly expands during pregnancy, the tattooed net stretches and expands with her skin, symbolically wrapping her unborn child in a magical web of divine protection. Furthermore, nestled right over her upper thighs are small, bold depictions of the god Bes, a fierce, grotesque, bearded dwarf deity with lion-like features, sticking his tongue out. Bes is the ultimate protector of mothers, infants, and sleep. It was believed that when a woman went into labor, the sight of the terrifying god Bes tattooed on her thighs would instantly scare away any lurking demons or evil spirits trying to harm the newborn baby as it entered the world. The tattoo artist continues her grueling work for hours. The room fills with the metallic smell of fresh blood, the heavy scent of burning myrrh incense, and the soft, repetitive tapping of the bronze needle against flesh. The priestess's skin swells, growing red, hot, and angry around the fresh black lines. When the tattooing is complete, the artist does not apply a modern plastic bandage or antiseptic cream. Instead, she smears a thick layer of crushed acacia bark, honey, and alabaster dust over the raw, bleeding skin. Honey is a natural antibiotic, a fact the Egyptians knew through thousands of years of trial and error, long before science understood bacteria, and it forms a sticky protective seal over the wound, helping it heal without rot. As the priestess rests, sipping cool water mixed with crushed barley, you ponder the incredible endurance required for such a practice. These women chose to undergo hours of agonizing physical pain, risking fatal infections, to permanently alter their bodies with ink that would endure not just for their lifetime, but for thousands of years into the future, waiting in dusty tombs for modern archaeologists to unearth them and marvel at their devotion. The ink on the mummy's skin is a testament to human resilience and the eternal desire to find protection in a dangerous, unpredictable world. But physical pain and spiritual devotion took an even more extreme, mind-bending form in another ancient culture far to the northwest, far away from the desert sun of Egypt. Imagine now leaving the sun-baked mud bricks of Deir el Medina and traveling across centuries and continents to the dense primeval oak forests of ancient Gaul in the year 50 BCE. The heat of Egypt vanishes, replaced instantly by a penetrating bone-chilling mist that hangs thick between massive, moss-covered trees. The forest is so dark and vast that the sun barely pierces the upper canopy. The air smells of wet earth, rotting autumn leaves, wood smoke, and wild mistletoe. You are about to witness what is arguably one of the most grueling, intense, and mysterious educational journeys in human history. The 20-year training of a Celtic Druid initiate. In modern popular culture, Druids are often portrayed as peaceful, white-robed old men with long gray beards, gently gathering herbs in the forest and speaking to animals. The historical reality recorded by ancient writers like Julius Caesar was vastly different, far darker, and infinitely more demanding. You are standing at the edge of a hidden forest clearing. Standing before you is a young man, no older than 14 years old, sent away by his noble Celtic family to begin a life of absolute seclusion, mental torment, and total dedication. He is a Druid initiate, and he has just stepped into a mental pressure cooker that will last 2 full decades. Why did Druid training take 20 years? The answer lies in a single fundamental rule of Celtic society. The Druids strictly forbade writing down any of their sacred knowledge, laws, science, or rituals. While the Greeks and Romans wrote everything down on parchment and papyrus, the Druids believed that writing weakened the human memory, made sacred truths vulnerable to theft by enemies, and cheapened the living power of the spoken word. Therefore, every single piece of knowledge required to run an entire civilization, astronomy, complex legal codes, genealogy, medical botany, religious mythology, philosophy, and ritual procedure, had to be memorized word for word, verse by verse, entirely inside the human brain. You watch the young initiate as his daily training begins under the harsh supervision of a senior Druid master. The master is a tall, imposing figure wrapped in a dark woolen cloak, holding a carved rowan wood staff. He does not smile. He does not offer gentle encouragement. The initiate's day begins before dawn in a cold, damp stone hut. His breakfast is a meager bowl of cold oat porridge and water. There are no books, no slates, no ink, and no notes. The learning methodology is pure, relentless, unyielding oral repetition. The Druid master begins reciting a complex rhythmic poem detailing the movement of the moon and stars, the intricate 55-year Celtic calendar cycle, and the precise boundaries of tribal territories established 300 years ago. The poem is hundreds of lines long, composed in an archaic, highly stylized poetic meter designed to make alteration impossible. The master speaks 10 lines. The initiate must repeat them back immediately, matching the exact pitch, cadence, and pronunciation. If he stumbles over a single word, mispronounces a syllable, or hesitates for more than a second, the master brings the sharp rowan staff down onto his knuckles or shoulders with a crack that echoes through the trees. Again, the master commands coldly. The initiate recites the lines again, his voice trembling, his fingers bruised and bleeding. He will spend 8 hours today repeating these exact same 10 lines until they are burned into his subconscious mind so deeply that he could recite them in his sleep, while freezing, or while being dragged off a battlefield. And that is just one single poem. Over the course of his 20-year apprenticeship, the initiate will be required to commit over 20,000 complex verses to memory. To help you understand the sheer scale of this mental burden, imagine sitting down today and memorizing the entire text of the Bible, the complete works of William Shakespeare, the entire Civil Code of the United States, and 3 medical textbooks, word for word, purely by listening to someone speak them aloud, without ever looking at a written page or writing down a single word. If a student's memory failed him, or if he proved mentally incapable of holding the vast library of oral knowledge, he was quietly dismissed in disgrace, returning to his tribe as a failed outcast. Only those with truly extraordinary, near-photographic auditory memories survived past the first 5 years. But the mental torture of Druid training was not limited to memorizing poetry in a cozy classroom. A major part of their education involved surviving brutal physical ordeals designed to push the human mind to the absolute brink of sanity, allowing them to communicate with the spirits of the underworld. You follow the initiate and his master deeper into the darkest part of the primeval forest as dusk falls. They stop beside an ancient icy mountain stream that flows out from a subterranean cave. The temperature is hovering just above freezing. The master turns to the boy and points to the black water. The initiate knows what is expected of him. He strips off his woolen tunic, standing shivering and naked in the biting fog. He steps into the rushing, frigid mountain water, wading in until it reaches his chest. His skin turns a mottled, terrifying shade of blue and white. His teeth chatter violently, his body shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. Yet, he must remain completely still in the icy water for 2 hours while reciting the sacred genealogies of the ancient Celtic kings. If his voice breaks or he steps out of the water before the master gives him permission, he fails the test and must start over the following night. This brutal sensory deprivation and physical exposure was designed to shatter the initiate's ego, breaking down his earthly attachments so his mind could enter altered states of consciousness. Another terrifying aspect of the advanced training involved the practice of incubation, or subterranean isolation. When an initiate reached his 15th year of training, he was taken deep inside a natural limestone cave, far beyond the reach of any sunlight. He was left entirely alone in total, suffocating pitch darkness, lying flat on his back inside a stone trench for days at a time, with no food, no light, and no human contact. In the absolute silence and blackness of the earth, deprived of all sensory input, the student's brain would begin to hallucinate wildly. He would hear voices whispering out of the damp stone, see terrifying visions of monstrous entities, and experience the feeling of his own soul detaching from his physical body. If he panicked, screamed, or lost his mind in the dark, he was unfit to be a druid. If he emerged days later calm, serene, and carrying deep spiritual insights from the dark, he was elevated to the rank of full priest. The Druids were not merely priests. They were the supreme judges, scientists, philosophers, and political power brokers of the Celtic world. A fully trained Druid had the power to step directly onto a blood-soaked battlefield between 2 warring armies, raise his hands, and instantly stop the battle. Such was the awe and terror they commanded that both armies would immediately lower their swords and accept the Druid's binding judgment. They were also believed to possess terrifying magical abilities, including the power to utter the Glamdikin, a devastating magical curse that could cause red blisters to break out all over an enemy's face, drive them insane, or cause their flesh to wither and die within days. As you watch the young initiate finally step out of the freezing stream, his body blue, his hands numb, but his voice still steadily chanting the ancient verses, you feel a profound sense of awe at the sheer terrifying discipline of the human mind in antiquity. He has 10 more years of this brutal existence before he can wear the white robe, carry the golden sickle to harvest sacred mistletoe from the highest oak branches, and sit in judgment over kings. As the fog rolls thicker through the ancient Gaulish forest, swallowing the initiate and his stern master, our journey through history takes another dramatic turn. We move forward in time once again, leaving the mystical, oral traditions of the Celts behind, and stepping into the polished, opulent, yet deeply paranoid halls of a late medieval European court in the year 1450. Here, in the gilded dining halls of kings, dukes, and popes, The greatest danger does not come from open battle, cold rivers, or dark caves. It comes silently, hidden inside a jewel-encrusted goblet of sweet-spiced wine, or masked beneath the savory garlic crust of a roasted pheasant. You are about to experience the terrifying world of the royal food taster and the bizarre, superstitious history of medieval anti-poison technology. Imagine standing in the grand banquet hall of a powerful Italian prince. The room is a dazzling display of wealth and arrogance. Massive chandeliers hold hundreds of dripping beeswax candles. Tapestries woven with real silver thread hang from the soaring stone walls, and tables groan under the weight of roasted boar, sugar sculptures, and imported wines. Yet, despite the music, laughter, and luxury, the atmosphere in this room is thick with pure, unadulterated terror. Everyone at the high table is terrified of everyone else. In the 14th and 15th centuries, political assassination by poison was not a rare shadowy anomaly. It was a refined, highly practiced art form, particularly in Renaissance Italy and Western Europe. Poison was known as the silent dagger. It left no bloody wounds, required no physical strength, and could easily be passed off by corrupt doctors as a sudden bout of cholera, stomach fever, or divine retribution. Arsenic, colorless, odorless, and virtually tasteless when mixed into heavy spiced food, was known as the inheritance powder. A disgruntled son could slip a pinch into his father's evening broth. A jealous cardinal could sprinkle it into his rival's wine. An ambitious noble could clear his path to the throne in a single meal. Because of this constant, suffocating fear of sudden agonizing death at the dinner table, medieval and Renaissance monarchs created an entire defense industry built around food tasting and anti-poison warding. You are standing directly behind the seat of the Duke. Sitting right next to his silver plate is a man whose entire life expectancy is measured meal by meal, the royal food taster. The taster is dressed in fine clothes, but his face is pale. His eyes dart nervously around the room, and his hands tremble slightly as he holds his silver tasting spoon. Every single item of food or drink that approaches the Duke's mouth must first pass through this man's digestive tract. You watch the elaborate ritual of the credenza, the formal process of testing and serving food. Before a dish is brought to the Duke's table from the kitchen, it must travel under armed guard, covered with locked silver lids to prevent anyone from dropping poison into it during transit through the hallways. Once the dish arrives at the high table, the carver opens the lid. The food taster steps forward. He takes a small silver spoon, scoops a generous portion of the steaming rich meat gravy, and places it into his own mouth. He chews slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He is not just tasting for flavor. He is hyper-analyzing every sensory sensation in his mouth. Does he feel a sudden faint metallic tang on his tongue? A strange burning sensation in his throat? A sudden numbness on his lips? Arsenic often produced a slight garlic-like odor or a faint burning sensation, while toxic plant extracts like nightshade or hemlock brought an overwhelming bitter sting. After swallowing the bite, the taster must stand completely still beside the Duke's chair for several minutes, allowing his digestive system to begin processing the food while the Duke watches him like a hawk. Imagine the absolute agonizing psychological torture of that wait. Every slight stomach gurgle, every minor ache, every sudden spike of anxiety feels like the onset of an agonizing death. If the taster collapses, vomits, or begins sweating profusely within 5 minutes, the Duke pushes his plate away, the guards seize the kitchen staff, and the taster is rushed off to be pumped full of useless medieval antidotes. If the taster survives the 5-minute wait without showing obvious signs of convulsing or dropping dead, the Duke picks up his fork and eats. But human tasters were known to be imperfect. Some poisons act slowly, taking hours or days to kill their victim, meaning a taster could happily eat a dish, pronounce it safe, and watch his master die in agony 12 hours later. Because human tasters were inherently unreliable and vulnerable to slow-acting toxins, medieval royalty turned to a far stranger, deeply mystical line of defense. Anti-poison gemstones, mythical creature parts, and magical testing devices. You look closely at the high table in front of the Duke, and you notice several bizarre, luxurious objects sitting beside his plate that look like something straight out of a fantasy novel. First, there is the Natternzunge, or the adder's tongue tree. This is an exquisite, elaborate centerpiece made of cast gold and silver, shaped like a mini leafless tree. Hanging from its metallic branches are dozens of dark, pointed, fossilized objects that look like petrified snake tongues. In reality, these are fossilized prehistoric shark teeth, but medieval lords believed with absolute certainty that they were the petrified tongues of magical serpents. The belief was that if a dish containing poison was placed near the adder's tongue tree, the fossilized teeth would instantly begin to sweat, change color, or drip blood, providing a clear visual warning before anyone took a single bite. Sitting right beside the silver tree is the absolute crown jewel of medieval anti-poison technology, a thick polished cup carved entirely out of a single piece of unicorn horn. Monarchs and high-ranking popes spent absolute fortunes, sometimes equivalent to the cost of an entire castle or a small country, to acquire genuine unicorn horns. In reality, these were the long, spiral ivory tusks of narwhals, harvested by Norse hunters in the icy waters of the Arctic and sold to gullible European elites as the legendary horn of the mythical white beast. In medieval lore, the unicorn was an emblem of supreme purity. It was believed that the beast could cleanse poisoned waterholes in the wild simply by dipping its horn into the stream. Therefore, a cup made of unicorn horn was believed to possess divine anti-poison properties. If poisoned wine was poured into a unicorn horn goblet, the liquid was said to boil, foam furiously, and crack the horn wide open, neutralizing the toxin and destroying the vessel to save the owner's life. Popes and kings refused to drink out of anything else, convinced that the Arctic narwhal tusk was their ultimate shield against assassination. Next to the unicorn horn cup sits another fascinating object, a large, shiny green stone set into a heavy gold ring worn on the Duke's index finger. This is a toadstone. Medieval naturalists believed that deep inside the heads of old, living toads, a magical glowing stone called a crappodina slowly formed over decades. To harvest a toadstone, one supposedly had to place a live toad on a piece of red cloth and wait for it to spit the stone out. In reality, toadstones were simply the fossilized, button-like teeth of an ancient prehistoric fish, lepidotes. But medieval elites believed they were powerful toxic detectors. When worn as a ring or dipped into a goblet, the toadstone was believed to grow burning hot against the wearer's skin, or change from bright green to a dark, dull black the moment it came into contact with poison. As you stand in the opulent, torch-lit hall, watching the Duke sip his wine from a narwhal tusk cup, while his terrified taster swallows another mouthful of suspicious gravy, you realize just how deeply paranoia shaped every single aspect of medieval elite life. Power, wealth, and high social status did not bring peace of mind. They brought a lifetime of staring at your dinner plate with cold terror, praying that your unicorn horn cup wouldn't crack and your toadstone ring wouldn't burn your finger. The banquet continues late into the night. The musicians play soft lutes in the gallery. The servants haul out heavy platters of sweet almond pastries, and the taster sits quietly in the corner, clutching his stomach, waiting to see if he will survive until morning. The contrast between these historical eras is stunning, yet a clear thread connects them all. From the groom of the Stool inspecting royal waste in Tudor England, to the leech collector bleeding in the Thames marshes, to the Egyptian priestess enduring hours of painful tattooing, to the Celtic Druid freezing in a dark forest cave, and the medieval food taster sweating over a spoon of gravy. Human history is a continuous saga of incredible endurance, strange beliefs, and grueling daily labor. Our journey through this terrifyingly fascinating day in history is far from complete. There are still many hours remaining, filled with afternoon chaos, brutal medieval medicine, nightfall rituals, and the strange realities of bedtime in the past. As the Duke finishes his meal and the taster lets out a quiet sigh of temporary relief, there is one more looming problem waiting just around the corner in the dark afternoon hours. The grand dining hall of the Italian prince slowly empties, leaving behind the stale, heavy stench of spilled wine, roasted meats, and snuffed tallow candles. The food taster, having survived another midday feast without his throat swelling shut, slips away into the shadowed corridors with a faint, exhausted prayer on his lips. But as you step back into the mid-afternoon glare of our historical journey, the respite is brief. The day is only halfway over, and the sheer, relentless physical labor of the past is waiting to grind you down once again. We return now to the sprawling, chaotic world of Tudor England, where the afternoon sun has done little to warm the damp stone corridors of Hampton Court Palace. It is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and as the groom of the stool, your respite from the monarch's intimate presence is officially over. The king has finished his late lunch, a massive 6-course affair featuring roasted heron, lamprey pie, and jellied calves' feet. And his erratic, temperamental digestion is demanding attention once more. You walk through the royal apartments, your leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the rushes covering the oak floorboards. The air inside the palace gallery is thick and suffocating. Because the windows are kept tightly shut to ward off the toxic afternoon vapors drifting from the nearby marshes, the air is a suffocating cocktail of stale perfume, body odor, burning wood smoke, and the sharp, acidic smell of vinegar used to wash down the tapestries. You enter the king's private privy chamber, and the reality of 16th century elite health crashes down upon you with full force. King Henry VIII is sitting in a carved oak armchair, his massive, heavy frame slouched to one side, his face twisted in a grimace of pure agony. His right leg, wrapped in thick linen bandages, is propped up on a velvet cushion. This is not merely a mild ache. It is the infamous, agonizing leg ulcer that will torment the king for the remainder of his life. Modern medical historians suspect it was caused by a devastating jousting accident years prior that crushed his thigh, leading to chronic osteomyelitis, a deep, incurable bacterial infection of the bone. The ulcer is open, weeping, and constantly inflamed. Standing beside the king are 2 of the most distinguished royal physicians in the realm, dressed in long, heavy robes of dark crimson velvet trimmed with fur. They are discussing the royal humors in rapid, authoritative Latin, gesturing toward a array of terrifying brass and iron surgical instruments laid out on a side table. Your arrival is greeted with a brief nod of relief from the head doctor. As the groom of the stool, it is your job to assist in holding the monarch steady while the doctors apply the afternoon's medical treatments. In the 16th century, royal medicine is not a precise, gentle science. It is a brutal trial-and-error nightmare based on theories that have barely evolved since the time of ancient Rome. The physicians believe that the king's agonizing leg pain is caused by a dangerous buildup of hot yellow bile and toxic phlegm that has pooled in his lower extremities. To cure it, they do not attempt to heal the wound. Instead, they intend to keep it open, burning, and draining, believing that if the wound closes, the trapped toxins will flood his heart and brain, causing instant death. You step up to the side of the chair, placing a firm, reassuring hand on the king's massive shoulder. The doctors prepare the first stage of the treatment, cauterization and caustic poultices. One of the assistants heats a long iron rod in a small portable brazier of glowing coals until the tip glows a faint cherry red. The head physician uses a pair of silver shears to cut away the yellowed, pus-soaked linen bandages wrapping the king's calf. The smell that erupts into the room is so powerful, so intensely putrid, that even with your nose pre-treated with clove oil, your eyes water and your stomach turns a violent somersault. The open flesh of the king's leg is swollen, purple, and deadened in spots, weeping a thin, foul-smelling fluid. The doctor takes a pair of silver tweezers and begins scraping away the dead, decayed flesh from the edges of the wound. The king lets out a low guttural roar of pain, his massive fingers digging into the carved wooden armrests with enough force to splinter the oak. You lean your weight into his shoulder, holding him firmly, offering low, soothing words of comfort that are completely swallowed by his screams. Next comes the cautery. The physician takes the white-hot iron rod from the fire and presses it directly against the bleeding, infected margins of the ulcer to seal the blood vessels and burn away the corrupt flesh. The sound is an agonizing, sharp hiss, followed instantly by a thick plume of gray, greasy smoke that rises toward the timbered ceiling. The room fills with the unmistakable, horrifying smell of burning human flesh. The king's body violently jolts, his muscles tensing like coiled iron wire, and for a terrifying second, you think the monarch might pass out from pure shock. He curses the physicians, cursing their mothers, their ancestors, and the entire medical profession, swearing to have them hanged at Tyburn if they don't finish quickly. Once the hot iron is pulled away, leaving behind a charred black ring of dead tissue, the doctors apply the afternoon poultice. Tudor medical remedies for open wounds are a bizarre stomach-churning concoction of herbal lore and superstition. Today's remedy consists of a thick green paste made from crushed hemlock, wormwood, pig dung, roasted onions, and crushed lead white, a toxic chemical pigment that doctors believe cools the inflammation. They smear the cool, heavy paste directly into the raw, smoking crater of the king's leg wound, then wrap it tightly in fresh, unsterilized strips of coarse linen. As the doctors step back, wiping their blood-stained hands on their aprons, the king slumps back into his chair, pale, dripping with cold sweat, and gasping for air. He is exhausted, bitter, and dangerously unpredictable. A single wrong word now could lead to execution. You gently pour him a goblet of heavy spiced hippocras, a sweet red wine infused with cinnamon, ginger, and sugar, and hand it to him with a deep bow. He drains the goblet in a single desperate gulp, tossing the empty silver cup onto the floor. As you kneel down to pick up the fallen goblet, you realize that this nightmare is repeated every single day, twice a day. The monarch of England, the absolute ruler of millions, spends his afternoons enduring tortures that modern humans would associate with medieval dungeon interrogations, all in the name of balance of humor's medicine. Leaving the king to rest under the influence of the heavy wine, you leave the royal apartments to carry out your afternoon inspection of the palace grounds. The contrast between the high-stakes, horror show medicine of the royal bedchamber and the grueling, everyday labor of the lower-class palace workers is stark. You step outside into the drafty, stone-paved inner courtyards. The afternoon weather has taken a turn for the worse. A cold, drizzling English rain is falling, turning the dirt and horse manure between the cobblestones into a thick, brown slurry. Your walk takes you toward the palace laundries, located in a damp, low-ceilinged stone outbuilding near the riverbank. This is the domain of the washerwomen, or laundresses, who handle one of the most physically destroying and chemically hazardous jobs in Tudor society. You push open the heavy wooden door of the laundry house, and you are immediately hit by a cloud of scalding, choking steam. The room is a chaotic, echoing chamber filled with massive copper cauldrons boiling over open wood fires. Dozens of women, their arms red, swollen, and raw from constant immersion in boiling water and harsh chemicals, are bent over wooden tubs, scrubbing heavy wools, linens, and court garments. In the 16th century, modern laundry detergent, bleach, and fabric softeners do not exist. To clean blood, sweat, grease, and urine out of the court's clothing, the laundresses rely on a substance known as lye water, or more commonly, stale urine. You watch a young laundress haul a sloshing wooden bucket over to a large tub filled with dirty linen shirts. The smell of stale, fermented human urine is so concentrated in this enclosed, steaming room that it burns the back of your throat. Throughout the palace, wooden tubs called piss pots are placed in hallways to collect urine from servants and courtyards. This collected urine is left to sit in open barrels for weeks until it ferments, allowing the urea inside to break down into ammonia. Ammonia is a powerful alkaline cleaning agent that cuts through grease, lifts tough stains, and bleaches white linen fabrics far better than plain water ever could. The young woman pours the sour, yellow fermented liquid directly into a tub of boiling water. She then uses a heavy wooden paddle called a dolly, or washing beetle, to pound, beat, and agitate the heavy waterlogged fabric for hours on end. The physical strain is immense. A single wet wool cloak or heavy linen bedsheet weighs tens of pounds. The laundresses must lift, wring out, and haul these soaking garments continuously, their bare feet sliding on the slick wet stone floor. Their hands are a terrifying testament to their labor. Constant contact with boiling water, raw ammonia lye, and harsh wood ash soaps strips the skin of all natural oils, leaving their hands chronically cracked, bleeding, and infected. The condition, known historically as washerwoman's hands, causes the skin to peel away in layers, exposing raw pink tissue beneath. Furthermore, breathing in the dense, ammonia-laden steam for 12 hours a day causes chronic respiratory illnesses, violent coughing fits, and chemical burns to the lining of the lungs. Yet, these women earn a pittance, a few pence a week, to ensure that the nobility can strut through the long galleries, looking pristine, stainless, and smelling faintly of lavender masking sprays applied over urine-cleansed linen. You inspect the stack of clean royal linens, nodding in quiet approval at their brightness, before stepping back out into the rainy courtyard. As you walk back toward the main building, you can't help but reflect on the sheer unyielding grossness of 16th century hygiene and sanitation. Every level of society, from the highest lord to the lowest washerwoman, is locked in a constant, losing battle against bodily decay, filth, and disease. But as bad as Tudor sanitation and medicine were, the historical record shows that other ancient civilizations faced even stranger, more mind-bending daily hazards during their mid-afternoon hours. Consider, for example, the bizarre world of ancient Greco-Roman hygiene and athletic culture, a world that existed over 1,500 years before the Tudors, yet operated on concepts of bodily care that sound utterly alien to modern ears. Shift your perspective now, leaving the rainy, urine-scented laundry houses of Hampton Court behind, and step into the scorching, bright mid-afternoon sun of ancient Rome in the year 110 CE. You are standing inside the grand marble-tiled courtyard of the Baths of Trajan in the heart of Rome. The afternoon is the designated time for citizens of all social classes to gather at the public baths. The air smells of sweet olive oil, burning charcoal from the hypocaust heating systems beneath the floors, sweat, and cheap wine. You walk through the soaring vaulted halls, surrounded by hundreds of bare-chested Romans, noisy vendors shouting out sales pitches for roasted sausages and cold water, and the echoing splashes of swimmers leaping into the frigidarium. In ancient Rome, soap, as we know it today, did not exist. The Romans did not scrub themselves with animal fat soap bars or scented body washes. Instead, their afternoon hygiene ritual relied on oil, physical scraping, and an incredible, bizarre commercial trade in human sweat. You watch a wealthy Roman merchant prepare for his bath, he steps into the unctuous warmth of the strigillarium, the scraping room. He strips completely naked and hands a flask of expensive scented Spanish olive oil to his personal slave. The slave pours the slick oil over his master's shoulders, rubbing it deeply into his skin, hair, and pores. The oil acts as a solvent, binding to the dirt, dead skin cells, dried sweat, and dust accumulated throughout the morning. Now comes the actual cleaning process. The slave takes a curved, crescent-shaped metal tool made of bronze or iron, called a strigil. Using firm scraping motions, the slave presses the dull metal blade of the strigil against the merchant's oily skin, scraping downward in long, deliberate strokes. The strigil acts like a squeegee, peeling away a thick, disgusting, dark gray sludge composed of olive oil, dead skin, sweat, and street dust. The slave wipes the scraped sludge off the metal blade onto a small clay dish. But in ancient Rome, this scraped body sludge, known as strumentum or gloios, was not thrown away into the sewer. It was a valuable commodity sold for high prices at the bathhouse door. In the Roman worldview, the sweat and skin scrapings of famous heroic gladiator fighters were believed to possess magical, invigorating, and aphrodisiac qualities. Wealthy Roman women and athletes bought small vials of gladiator sweat and strigil scrapings to use as a luxurious, albeit horrifying, face cream, skin ointment, or anti-aging cosmetic. They believed that smearing the dried sweat and oil of an invincible arena fighter onto their own skin would transfer his physical vitality, beauty, and youth directly into their veins. As you watch a bathhouse vendor carefully scoop the gray, oily sludge from a gladiator's strigil, scraping into a small glass vial, sealing it with wax to be sold to an eager customer, you realize that humanity's willingness to endure and pay for bizarre bodily treatments knows no bounds in any era. Leaving the steamy, oil-slick halls of the Roman baths behind, our journey takes us deeper into the afternoon, back to the dark, mysterious corners of ancient history, where health, survival, and protection required even more extreme measures. Return once again to the primeval oak forests of ancient Gaul, where the Celtic Druid initiate is enduring the brutal mid-afternoon segment of his endless daily training. The cold rain that was falling in Tudor England is here a heavy freezing sleet that rattles against the high canopy of the oak trees. The initiate has spent 6 straight hours repeating complex legal codes and astronomical verses under the watchful, unyielding eye of his master. His voice is raspy, his lips are chapped and bleeding from the freezing wind, and his legs are trembling with fatigue. In the afternoon hours, the Druid's training shifts from pure mental recitation to the dangerous, precise study of botany, toxicology, and natural magic. The Druids were the sole physicians and herbalists of the Celtic world. Without written texts, they had to memorize the exact shape, leaf structure, toxic dosages, and medicinal preparations of hundreds of wild plants, roots, fungi, and tree barks scattered across the European wilderness. You watch the master lead the initiate to a damp, shaded hollow beneath a massive, rotting oak tree. Growing out of the dark, decaying leaf litter is a cluster of pale, deadly plants with dark purple berries and dull green leaves. Atropa belladonna, commonly known as deadly nightshade. The master points his carved staff at the plant. He does not allow the boy to touch it with his bare fingers. He demands that the initiate recite, from memory, the exact chemical effects, lethal doses, and spiritual properties of the plant. The initiate clears his throat, his voice steady despite his shivering body. He recites the ancient verses that explain how a single crushed berry can cause the pupils to dilate. 2 berries can cause wild hallucinations and violent delirium, and 3 berries can freeze the human heart in its chest within hours. He must also recite the precise counter-remedies: how to mix crushed charcoal, vinegar, and specific oak bark teas to induce immediate vomiting and absorb the toxin before it destroys the liver. In a world where every wild forest contained plants that could kill an entire village in a single afternoon, the Druids' absolute flawless recall of botanical toxicology was the only line of defense separating their people from accidental mass poisoning. To test the initiate's knowledge under physical duress, the master performs a mental trial that borders on psychological torture. He hands the boy a small wooden bowl containing a dark bitter herbal broth. The master tells the initiate that the bowl contains a weak infusion of a toxic plant, perhaps a small non-lethal dose of hemlock or aconite, mixed with a specific antidote. The initiate is given 10 seconds to smell the steam rising from the bowl, identify every single plant ingredient by scent alone, and determine whether the antidote ratio is correct. The boy lifts the bowl to his nose with shaking hands. The steam carries a bitter, earthy, sharply pungent aroma. His heart pounds against his ribs. He knows that if he misidentifies the smell or panics, he could swallow a toxic brew that will leave him paralyzed and writhing on the damp forest floor. He closes his eyes, blocking out the sound of the freezing sleet, the cold wind, and the terrifying presence of his master. He focuses entirely on his sense of smell, picking apart the complex aromatic layers in his mind. The bitter tang of wild mustard, the sweet pine-like scent of juniper, the sharp metallic odor of crushed foxglove, and the earthy undertone of valerian root. After a long agonizing pause, the boy looks up into his master's cold eyes and speaks 3 words in the ancient Celtic tongue, identifying the precise mix and declaring it safe to drink. The master stares at him for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he snatches the bowl from the boy's hands and tosses the liquid onto the ground. It was a trick, a test of confidence and nerve. A druid must never show fear, doubt, or hesitation when making a medical or spiritual judgment, even when his own life hangs in the balance. The afternoon begins to fade into the dim, shadowy twilight of the northern forest. The initiate's day is far from over, but his mind is nearing absolute exhaustion. Leaving the shivering Celtic apprentice in his dark oak grove, our narrative swings back to the late medieval era, to the paranoid, jewel-encrusted world of the Renaissance courts, where the afternoon hours bring their own unique brand of high-stakes terror. Return now to the castle of the Italian prince, where the afternoon hours between lunch and dinner are filled with intense diplomatic maneuvering, secret intrigue, and the constant, suffocating fear of hidden toxins. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the prince is preparing to receive foreign ambassadors in his private audience chamber. But before any guest is permitted to enter, the prince's private security detail, headed by the court alchemist and the head taster, must perform the afternoon clearing of the room. In the mid-15th century, assassination by poison was not limited to food and wine served at the dinner table. Assassins had become terrifyingly creative, developing methods of delivering lethal toxins through everyday objects that target the skin, lungs, and mucosal membranes. You watch the court alchemist walk slowly around the audience chamber, holding a lit wax candle and a long silver rod. He is searching for poisoned surfaces. One of the most infamous methods of Renaissance assassination was the poisoned letter, or poisoned book. Covert agents would smear the pages of a document or book with a subtle, slow-acting grease laced with arsenic or cyanide. When the victim flipped through the pages, moistening his thumb with his tongue to turn the heavy parchment, he would ingest small lethal doses of the poison over several hours, dying days later of what appeared to be a natural illness. To prevent this, the alchemist uses a pair of silver tongs to hold all incoming diplomatic missives and petitions over a small brazier of burning sulfur. The sulfur fumes smoke out any organic toxins, while the heat causes volatile liquid poisons to evaporate before the prince ever touches the feast. Next, the alchemist inspects the royal seating. Another favorite method of medieval political execution was the poisoned cushion or poisoned clothing. Garments, saddles, or chair cushions would be treated with harsh corrosive substances like mercury chloride or Spanish fly, cantharides, dissolved in animal fats. When the victim sat on the padded velvet, his body heat would warm the fat, allowing the powerful chemical irritants to absorb directly through his hose and skin, causing agonizing internal blistering, kidney failure, and slow death. The taster presses a piece of clean white linen against the velvet cushion of the prince's throne, then holds the linen up to his nose, smelling for the sharp, sweet odor of mercury compounds or bitter almonds. Even the air itself is treated with intense paranoia. Hanging from the stone ceiling of the chamber are large perforated silver balls called pomanders. Inside these silver spheres are tight wads of expensive ambergris, musk, dried cloves, and camphor. The belief is that the sweet, heavy scent of the pomander creates a magical barrier in the air, neutralizing any toxic miasmas, poison vapors, or pestilential gases that a visiting ambassador might try to release into the room. The prince enters the room, wrapped in a heavy velvet gown, lined with ermine fur. He looks exhausted, his eyes sunken, his skin pale. Living under constant, relentless fear of assassination creates a state of severe chronic psychological stress that slowly destroys the human body from within. He sits down on his thoroughly inspected throne, clutching his narwhal tusk cup in one hand and his green toadstone ring on the other. He takes a sip of warm, mulled wine, tasted 3 minutes prior by his exhausted taster, and prepares to greet the ambassador. As the afternoon light fades outside the high stained glass windows, casting long dark crimson shadows across the polished marble floor, the prince leans back against his velvet seat, letting out a heavy, weary sigh. He has survived the afternoon, but the night is approaching, and in the medieval world, nightfall brings a whole new realm of darkness, danger, and bizarre bedtime rituals. Back in Tudor England, the sun has finally set over the winding, muddy Thames River. The bells of the palace chapel chime 6 o'clock, signaling the end of the afternoon labor and the beginning of the evening preparations. You walk through the darkening corridors of Hampton Court Palace, your legs aching from hours of standing, walking, and holding down a screaming king. The palace is transforming. The cold gray daylight is replaced by the flickering yellow glare of hundreds of tallow candles and roaring log fires in the great hearths. Your duties as Groom of the Stool are entering their final, most demanding phase of the day. You must now prepare the king's bedchamber for the night, a process that involves complex security checks, hygiene routines, and structural preparations designed to keep the monarch safe, comfortable, and free from evil spirits until dawn. You push open the double oak doors leading into the royal bedchamber. The room is quiet now, but the air is still heavy with the lingering smells of the afternoon's medical treatment: charred flesh, hemlock poultices, and vinegar. Before the king can retire for the evening, there is one critical, stomach-churning task that you must supervise: the preparation of the royal bed. In Tudor England, a royal bed is not just a mattress and a pair of sheets. It is a massive, multi-layered wooden structure that represents the supreme status of the monarch. But it is also a potential death trap. You watch 4 lower-class bedchamber servants begin the elaborate ritual known as making the king's bed. First, the servants take long, smooth wooden rods called bed staffs and thrust them violently into the deep straw mattresses that form the base of the bed. They rake the staffs back and forth through the straw, searching for anything hidden inside. They are checking for 3 specific hazards: sharp daggers or iron spikes hidden by assassins, poisonous snakes or rats that may have crawled into the warm straw during the day, and heavy lumps in the straw that could cause the king discomfort during his rest. Once the straw mattress is declared safe, a thick feather bed, stuffed with thousands of soft down feathers harvested from geese, is laid on top. Now comes the part of the process that requires physical muscle and meticulous care. To ensure that no bedbugs, lice, or fleas are hiding inside the feather mattress, 2 servants climb directly onto the bed. They wear clean, white linen socks over their feet, and they physically jump, stomp, and march across the entire surface of the massive feather bed, flattening out lumps and crushing any unfortunate insects that might be lurking in the down. Watching 2 adult men solemnly jumping up and down on the king's bed while you stand by holding a silver candle holder is an utterly absurd, darkly comedic sight. Yet, in 1538, this is a serious high-stakes royal duty governed by strict protocol. Once the mattress has been thoroughly stomped and flattened, fine linen sheets, bleached with urine lye and scented with dried lavender, are pulled tightly over the feather bed. Heavy woolen blankets and a top quilt of crimson velvet embroidered with gold lions are layered over the top. The final touch is the placement of the night toilet equipment beside the bed. You personally inspect the close stool, ensuring the pewter basin inside has been thoroughly scoured, dried, and lined with a fresh layer of rosewater-scented water. You place a fresh stack of bleached linen wiping cloths on the side table, along with a silver chamber pot for light night use. As the servants finish their work and bow out of the room, you step over to the grand fireplace, throwing several heavy logs of oak onto the embers. The flames leap up, casting dancing orange shadows across the carved tapestries, depicting ancient battles and biblical scenes. You sit down on a small wooden stool beside the hearth, resting your elbows on your knees, taking a brief moment of quiet solitude before the king returns from his evening meal. Your mind wanders back through the incredible, brutal day you have witnessed. From the morning's waste analysis to the leech collector's bleeding legs, the turnspit boy's blistered skin, the gong farmer's terrifying night soil digging, the Egyptian priestess's sacred ink, the Druids' mental torture, and the food taster's terrifying meals, human existence in the past was a constant, grueling battle against pain, filth, fear, and absurd beliefs. Yet, as evening settles like a heavy blanket over the world, the day is far from over. There are still evening meals to be served, strange bedtime medicines to be swallowed, night watches to be kept, and the quiet, mysterious darkness of the night to be survived. The heavy oak doors of the royal bedchamber creak open, shattering your brief moment of hearthside reflection. It is now 7 o'clock in the evening. King Henry VIII hobbles into the room, leaning heavily on the broad shoulder of a young court attendant, his silver-bound walking staff thumping rhythmically against the stone floor. The king is thoroughly exhausted, his face flushed red from hours of sitting in the hot, crowded dining hall, and his mouth smelling heavily of sweet dark ale, roasted venison, and spiced pears. Your rest is instantly over. You spring up from your wooden stool, smoothing down your doublet, and bow deeply until your forehead nearly touches your knees. The evening routine, the protracted, delicate process of undressing, unlacing, cleaning, and preparing the Tudor monarch for sleep, has officially begun. Undressing a King of England in 1538 is almost as complex as putting his wardrobe on in the morning, with the added hazard that the king is now tired, intoxicated, and in severe physical pain as the afternoon's leg treatment begins to wear off. You approach His Majesty with practiced caution, taking his heavy velvet-trimmed cloak and carefully draping it over a wooden rack. Next come the jewelry and status symbols. You unclamp the heavy gold collar of the Order of the Garter from his chest, set it into a velvet-lined oak chest, and slip 6 massive gemstone rings off his swollen, sweaty fingers. As you unbutton his thick wool doublet, the heat trapped beneath his heavy layers of clothing escapes into the drafty room. The smell is an overpowering mix of expensive musk perfume, sharp body sweat, and the underlying sour tang of the rotting pus weeping beneath his leg bandages. With the outer layers removed, you pull off his silk hose and heavy leather shoes. The king lets out a ragged, trembling sigh as his bandaged right leg is freed from the constriction of his boot. He sits down heavily on the edge of the newly stomped feather bed, his broad shoulders slouched, staring blankly into the dancing flames of the fireplace. Now comes the evening hygiene check. In the Tudor worldview, before a person surrenders their body to the defenseless state of sleep, the humors must be brought into balance, and the skin must be cleansed of the day's toxic dust. You bring over a silver basin filled with warm water, infused with crushed rose petals, elderflower, and a dash of white wine vinegar. You kneel before the king, dipping a soft linen cloth into the scented water, and gently wash his face, neck, and thick calloused hands. Henry closes his eyes as the cool cloth wipes away the grease and sweat from his forehead. For a fleeting second, the terrifying tyrannical ruler of England looks remarkably like an fragile, aging, defeated human being. He mutters a quiet, raspy thank you under his breath, a rare, priceless token of royal gratitude that reminds you why men compete so fiercely to hold your position. Next, you tend to his mouth. Nighttime dental care in the Tudor court is a strange affair. You offer the king a small cup of warm, diluted red wine mixed with crushed mint leaves and salt. He's swishing the dark liquid around his mouth to rinse away the evening's food remnants before spitting it into a pewter basin held by a junior servant. Then, using a small silver scraper shaped like a miniature leaf, you carefully scrape the thick white coating off his tongue. In 16th century medicine, a coated tongue is considered a clear warning sign of stomach corruption and trapped bile. You wipe the tongue scraper clean on a cloth, checking the color of the scrapings to ensure no dark bile has accumulated since his late lunch. With his mouth rinsed and his skin wiped down, it is time for the evening sleep draft. Tudor medicine treats sleep not merely as a natural biological necessity, but as a precarious medical state where the soul is vulnerable and the body's digestive fires cool down dramatically. To ensure the king stays asleep through the throbbing agony of his leg ulcer, the royal physicians have prepared a heavy, lethal-looking liquid in a crystal vial. You take the vial, pour a small measure into a silver goblet, and hand it to the monarch. The sleep potion is a dark, thick syrup known as laudanum or diacodium. Its primary active ingredient is liquid opium dissolved in fortified wine, mixed with crushed poppy heads, crushed pearls, syrup of dried roses, and a pinch of powdered gold leaf. The opium lulls the central nervous system, numbing the excruciating pain in his leg bones, while the crushed pearls and gold leaf are believed to strengthen the heart against night vapors. Henry tilts his head back, swallowing the bitter, dark syrup in one gulp, wincing at the harsh, medicinal aftertaste. He hands the goblet back to you, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and swings his heavy, bandaged legs up onto the tall feather bed. You pull the fine linen sheets and heavy velvet quilts up to his chin, tucking him in tightly. Then, pulling back the massive iron-framed bed curtains, you draw the thick velvet drapes completely closed around the four posts of the bed. This practice of completely enclosing the bed in heavy velvet curtains is not just for privacy or warmth. It is a vital medical defense mechanism. Tudor medical theory holds that night air, known as miasma, is inherently toxic, dense with damp, rot-inducing vapors, disease-carrying fogs, and malicious night spirits. Closing the thick velvet bed curtains creates a microclimate inside the bed, trapping the king's own body heat and breathing vapors to shield him from the chilly draft blowing through the stone room. With the king safely enclosed inside his velvet cocoon, your work as Groom of the Stool shifts from physical assistance to quiet, high-stakes night vigilance. You do not get to leave the room, retire to a comfortable bed, or go to sleep. You must spend the entire night sitting on a small hard truckle bed or a pallet laid on the floorboards directly at the foot of the king's bed. The king is never left alone, not even for a single minute. If he wakes up in the middle of the night, needing to use the closed stool, if his leg ulcer begins to bleed through his bandages, or if he suffers a sudden, terrifying nightmare brought on by the opium syrup, You must be awake, alert, and standing beside his bed within 3 seconds. You pull a heavy woolen blanket around your shoulders, sit down on your narrow floor pallet, and adjust the small oil-burning night lamp so its flame is turned down to a faint orange ember. The bedchamber falls into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the crackle of dying oak logs in the fireplace, the howling of the damp wind outside the leaded glass windows, and the heavy, ragged, opium-laced snoring of King Henry VIII echoing from inside the velvet curtains. As you sit in the dim, warm shadows of the royal bedchamber, staring into the flickering embers, your mind once again wanders away from Tudor England, reflecting on how other cultures across history navigated the strange, terrifying, and ritual-filled hours between twilight and sleep. Consider, for instance, the evening world of ancient Egypt, a world where nightfall was not merely a change in lighting, but a terrifying cosmic battle where the sun god Ra died, entering the underworld, leaving humans defenseless against a host of unseen night demons, disease spirits, and malevolent ghosts. Shift your focus now, leaving the snoring Tudor king in his velvet bed, and travel back through time to the ancient workers' village of Deir el-Medina in 1300 BCE. The blistering heat of the Egyptian daytime sun has completely vanished, replaced by the sudden penetrating chill of the desert night. The sky above the Valley of the Kings is a staggering midnight blue tapestry filled with millions of cold, brilliant stars. Inside a mud brick home, the high-ranking priestess of Hathor, whom we saw enduring hours of agonizing tattooing earlier in the day, is preparing for sleep. Her fresh black tattoos across her shoulders, throat, and lower abdomen are red, swollen, and throbbing, with a dull, constant ache. In ancient Egypt, going to bed was a spiritually dangerous act. Sleep was considered a temporary state of death, where the human soul, the Baal, partially detached from the physical body and wandered into the dream realm, a realm dangerously close to the underworld, where hungry spirits and demons lurked in the dark. To ensure she survives the night and wakes up alive when the sun rises, the priestess performs a series of precise evening protective rituals before touching her bed. First comes the cleansing of the room's air. She takes a small clay brazier filled with glowing charcoal embers and sprinkles a generous pinch of kefir onto the heat. Kefir is the legendary complex incense of ancient Egypt. It is made by grinding 16 distinct ingredients together over weeks: frankincense, myrrh, sweet flag, broom, cinnamon, raisins, honey, wine, and aromatic resins. As the kefir burns, it releases a thick, intoxicating, sweet and spicy smoke that fills the small room. This smoke is not just for pleasant fragrance. It is believed to act as a chemical and spiritual fumigant, driving away scorpions, snakes, evil spirits, and the dreaded Neshmet, the terrifying night fever spirits that Egyptians believed entered the nose and ears of sleeping people to steal their life force. Next, she tends to her painful fresh tattoos. She gently wipes away the dried blood and oozing lymph fluid, using a piece of soft linen soaked in warm milk. She then reapplies her protective ointment, a thick sticky layer of raw honey mixed with crushed lapis lazuli powder, acacia gum, and animal fat. The honey stings slightly as it settles into the punctured skin, but its natural antibacterial seal prevents the desert dust and flies from causing a fatal infection in the raw wounds. With her skin protected, she moves to the most important piece of ancient Egyptian sleep furniture, her bed and headrest. An ancient Egyptian bed is completely different from a modern mattress. It consists of a simple wooden frame strung with tightly woven palm fiber cords that create a springy webbed surface. There are no soft feather pillows or soft cotton sheets. Instead of a pillow, the priestess uses a carved wooden or alabaster headrest. A headrest is a crescent-shaped piece of curved wood supported by a central pedestal, standing about 6 to 8 inches high. The sleeping person lies on their side, resting their neck, not their head, directly inside the curved wooden crescent. To modern ears, sleeping with your neck resting on a hard wooden pedestal sounds like an absolute recipe for chronic spinal damage and sleepless agony. But for the ancient Egyptian elite, the headrest was brilliant, practical, and spiritually essential. Practically, keeping your head elevated 6 inches off the ground kept your hair, which was often elaborately braided, oiled, and styled, completely free from dust, sand, and crawling desert pests like scorpions, biting ants, and beetles that roamed the mud brick floors at night. It also allowed cool air to circulate under your neck in the suffocating desert heat. Spiritually, the headrest was a living amulet. The curved crescent holding up the head represented the eastern horizon, while the human head resting upon it represented the rising sun. By placing her head on the wooden pedestal, the priestess was magically enacting the daily rebirth of the sun god, guaranteeing that her head would stay attached to her shoulders and that she would wake up alive in the morning. To reinforce this protection, the base of her carved headrest features an intricate, deeply carved image of the god Bes, the same grotesque bearded dwarf deity tattooed across her thighs. Before lying down, she dips her index finger into a bowl of sacred water and traces a protective circle in the dust around her woven bed. She then lies down on her side, settling her neck carefully into the smooth curved wood of the headrest. Her fresh tattoos throb against the cool linen of her tunic. The sweet, heavy smoke of burning kifi fills her lungs, and the protective image of Bes watches over her in the dark room as she closes her eyes, surrendering her body to the spirit world of dreams. The absolute silence of the Egyptian desert night stands in stark, breathtaking contrast to the sensory environment of our next historical destination. Shift your focus once again, leaving the priestess resting her neck on her carved headrest, and travel across time and space to the cold, mist-shrouded wilderness of ancient Gaul, where the Celtic Druid initiate is facing his evening ordeal. It is now 9 o'clock at night in the primeval oak forest. The freezing sleet has stopped, leaving behind a clear bitter frost that sparkles on the fallen leaves under the light of a silver full moon. After 15 continuous hours of relentless oral memorization, freezing river trials, and botanical toxicology tests, you might assume that the 14-year-old Druid initiate is finally allowed to curl up beside a warm fire and rest his exhausted brain. You would be dead wrong. In the world of the ancient Celts, the night is not the end of the day. It is the absolute beginning. The Celts calculated their calendar not by days, but by nights. In their worldview, darkness always precedes light, just as winter precedes summer and chaos precedes order. Therefore, the night hours are the most sacred, powerful, and intense period for Druid spiritual work and advanced astronomical observation. You watch the initiate standing on the high, windy summit of a rocky limestone crag overlooking the dark forest canopy. He is wrapped in a thick, coarse cloak of undyed white wool, but his bare feet are resting directly on the frost-covered stone. Standing beside him is his unyielding master, holding a carved bronze sighting tool. The boy's evening duty is to conduct a 4-hour observation of the night sky, mapping the precise movements of the moon, stars, and constellations. Without telescopes, glass lenses, or written charts, the initiate must use his bare eyes and his phenomenal trained memory to track the celestial clock. He stares up into the freezing night sky, his eyes watering from the icy wind. He must recite, out loud, the exact position of the Pleiades constellation, the angle of the crescent moon relative to the horizon, and the precise mathematical alignment of the stars that signal the approach of Samhain, the major Celtic winter festival. The master questions him relentlessly. Where will the white star stand in 3 moons' time? How many days remain in the current lunar cycle before the sacred mistletoe must be harvested with the golden sickle? The boy answers every question without hesitation, his raspy voice cutting through the silent, freezing night air. His brain is so thoroughly saturated with thousands of memorized astronomical verses that he can calculate complex lunar cycles in seconds, entirely in his head. When the astronomical observation is finally complete at midnight, the master leads the boy down from the rocky crag to a small isolated stone shelter tucked into the side of the hill. There is no fireplace inside. There are no feather beds, soft blankets, or wooden headrests. The initiate's bed is a thin layer of damp pine needles laid directly over the freezing stone floor. His pillow is a smooth river rock. His only warmth comes from wrapping his wet woolen cloak tightly around his shivering body. Before he is allowed to lie down, the master hands him his final evening task, the practice of dream recollection. The Druids believed that dreams were direct communications from the ancestors, the forest gods, and the spirits of the land. But to receive a true prophetic dream, the mind had to be held in a state of absolute, disciplined clarity before sleeping. The initiate must lie flat on his back on the cold stone, holding a small piece of carved oak wood over his heart. He must mentally review every single event, verse, word, and physical sensation of his 15-hour day in reverse order, starting from standing on the windy crag a moment ago, working backward through the freezing river test, the toxic nightshade examination, his morning oat porridge, and his dawn awakening. This grueling mental exercise, known in esoteric traditions as the backward review, forces the conscious mind to completely clear its emotional clutter, training the memory to retain absolute detail even while transitioning into unconsciousness. As the boy slowly works his way backward through his day, his physical body numbs from the cold stone floor, his muscles stop shivering, and his breathing slows to a deep, steady rhythm. By the time his mental review reaches the previous morning's dawn, his mind slips effortlessly from waking consciousness into a deep, vivid, lucid dream state, where he will spend the remaining hours of the night wrestling with the symbolic visions of the Celtic underworld. Leaving the young druid sleeping on his river rock pillow in the freezing Gaulish hills, our journey takes us back to the opulent, paranoid world of the late medieval Italian courts, where the evening hours bring a very different kind of bedtime struggle. Return now to the grand palace of the Italian prince in the year 1450. It is 11 o'clock at night. The grand banquet is over, the visiting ambassadors have retired to their quarters, and the massive palace is plunged into heavy shadows. Inside the prince's private bedchamber, the air is thick with intense, suffocating paranoia. The prince has survived another day without drinking poisoned wine or sitting on a toxic velvet cushion. But the night brings a terrifying new vulnerability: the fear of sleep. While you are asleep, you cannot look for sweating adder's tongue trees. You cannot watch your taster chew your food. You cannot check if your toadstone ring is turning black. Sleep is the absolute paradise of the assassin. You stand in the shadows of the prince's bedchamber, watching his elaborate, nightmarish bedtime security routine unfold. The prince does not sleep in a quiet, secluded room, alone with his wife. His bedchamber is transformed into a fortified military bunker. Standing outside his iron-reinforced oak doors are 4 heavy guards armed with crossbows and halberds. But the guards outside are not trusted entirely either. Guards can be bribed, threatened, or poisoned by rival noble families. Inside the room, sitting on a chair right beside the prince's bed, is his most trusted, highly paid personal bodyguard. Often a foreign mercenary who has no political ties to the local Italian factions. The bodyguard sits with a drawn dagger across his knees, staring at the closed door, staying awake for the entire 12-hour night shift. Next comes the food and drink security for the night. Beside the bed sits a silver nightstand. On it rests a small glass flask of water and a plate of dry biscuits in case the prince wakes up thirsty or hungry during the night. Before the prince touches a single drop of the water, the food taster, who is standing beside the bed, exhausted and looking ready to collapse, must step forward and take a deep gulp of the water from the flask in front of the prince's eyes. The prince then watches the taster for several long tense minutes. Only when he is satisfied that his taster is not gasping for air or clutching his throat does the prince pick up the flask and take a small sip. Now comes the physical inspection of the bed itself. Just as in Tudor England, servants used long wooden rods to poke and prod through the soft feather mattresses, checking for hidden blades, poisonous snakes, or altered springs. The prince then takes his most prized protective possession, his polished cup made of narwhal tusk, unicorn horn. He places it directly on the nightstand beside his head, filling it to the brim with plain water. He believes that if an assassin sneaks into the room while he is sleeping and tries to drop liquid arsenic or cyanide into his night flask, the magical unicorn horn cup sitting beside it will instantly begin to sweat, smoke, or shatter with a loud crack, waking him up before he can drink the poison. Finally, the prince prepares his own personal body armor for sleep. He does not wear soft linen pajamas. Underneath his heavy silk nightshirt, he wears a fine, lightweight shirt of flexible steel chainmail. Sleeping in a metal chainmail shirt is cold, stiff, and deeply uncomfortable. The iron rings press into your ribs and shoulders every time you roll over, leaving red, bruised grid patterns across your skin in the morning. But for a medieval Italian ruler, living in an era of relentless family feuds and political poisonings, a bruised rib is a minor price to pay to ensure that a dagger thrust through his velvet quilt in the dark bounces harmlessly off steel wire. The prince climbs into his high four-poster bed, clutching a small wooden crucifix in one hand and a silver dagger under his pillow in the other. He looks over at his resting taster sitting on the floor, nods to his armed mercenary bodyguard sitting by the door, and slowly closes his eyes. Yet, despite his chainmail shirt, his unicorn horn cup, his armed guards, and his food taster, his sleep is fitful, broken, and terrified. Every creak of the aging timber floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the heavy shutters, and every shift of the bodyguard's chair causes him to startle awake, his hand instinctively flying to the hilt of the dagger beneath his pillow. As you watch the paranoid prince toss and turn in his iron chainmail shirt, you realize the profound, tragic irony of extreme power in the past. The higher you rose in society, the more luxurious your surroundings became, the less peace of mind you were ever allowed to enjoy. Back in Tudor England, the midnight hour has officially arrived at Hampton Court Palace. The great clock tower in the courtyard strikes 12 heavy booming chimes that echo through the quiet stone corridors and drift across the dark, silent Thames River. Inside the royal bedchamber, the oak logs in the fireplace have burned down to a pile of soft, glowing orange embers, casting a warm, gentle light across the dark, timbered ceiling. You are still sitting on your narrow floor pallet at the foot of King Henry VIII's massive velvet bed, wrapped tightly in your woolen blanket. Your eyes are heavy, your limbs ache with a deep, crushing exhaustion, but you force yourself to stay awake, staring at the soft orange glow of the night lamp. Inside the velvet bed curtains, the king's snorts and heavy snores have smoothed out into a deep, unbroken rhythm as the heavy opium sleep syrup takes full control of his brain and body. His leg ulcer is temporarily forgotten in the chemically induced darkness of his sleep. Out in the hallways beyond the heavy double doors, you hear the quiet, rhythmic footsteps of the palace night watchmen conducting their hourly rounds, their leather boots thumping against the flagstones, their iron-tipped pikes clinking against their armor. Farther away, down in the subterranean depths of the palace outhouses, the gong farmers are currently knee-deep in the cold, dark privy pits, scooping human waste into wooden tubs under the flickering light of candles, doing the dirty, invisible work that keeps the kingdom functioning while the court sleeps. Out in the cold Thames marshes, the Leech collector is sleeping in his damp, drafty hovel, his bare legs wrapped in dirty rags to stop the continuous trickle of blood from his harvest scars, praying that his silver groat will buy enough bread to keep his family alive tomorrow. And here, in the quiet heart of the royal apartments, You sit, the groom of the stool, a knight of the realm, the keeper of the king's most intimate secrets, resting your aching back against the carved bedpost, waiting for the dawn. The day has been long, bizarre, and brutally exhausting. You have witnessed the heights of royal luxury and the depths of human filth, the pain of ancient body art, the mental torture of sacred druid training, and the suffocating paranoia of medieval dining rooms. As the night deepens and the firelight slowly fades, the past settles into a quiet, peaceful stillness. The sounds of history slowly recede into the shadows. The heavy, suffocating silence of the Tudor bedchamber settles over you as the grandfather clock in the distant gallery marks the hour of 2 a.m. King Henry VIII shifts heavily behind his crimson velvet curtains, his deep opium-laced breathing briefly breaking into a sharp, rasping cough before returning to its slow, rhythmic cadence. You sit motionless on your narrow pallet at the foot of the bed, your back propped against the carved oak bedpost, pulling your heavy wool blanket tighter around your shoulders against the creeping cold of the Thames River draft. Your eyes burn with exhaustion, but sleep is a luxury you cannot afford. To close your eyes now is to risk failing the monarch during a midnight crisis. If the king wakes up needing the close stool, if his leg ulcer begins to bleed through its linen wrappings, or if a sudden fever grips his humors, your response must be instant. So you stare into the warm, dying embers of the hearth, your mind wandering through the vast, quiet expanse of the night. Out beyond the heavy stone walls of Hampton Court, the rest of the world is locked in its own nocturnal reality. Miles away in the dark, marshy lowlands, the Leech collector lies shivering on his straw mat, his bandaged, punctured legs throbbing with a dull, persistent ache as his blood slowly clots in the damp air. In the subterranean vaults beneath the palace outhouses, the gong farmers are pulling their final sloshing wooden tubs of night soil up into the horse-drawn carts, their skin coated in sweat and muck, eager to finish their shift before the first pale light of dawn forces them back into the shadows of society. Far across the continent of Europe, time folded through history. Other figures rest in their own distinct worlds. In the sun-dried mud brick village of Deir el-Medina, the ancient Egyptian priestess lies on her side, her neck cradled in her carved wooden headrest. Her freshly inked tattoos, the sacred protective net across her belly, and the watchful eyes on her throat tingle under their coating of honey and alabaster dust, guarding her soul as it wanders through the realm of dreams. High in the mist-shrouded hills of ancient Gaul, the Celtic Druid initiate sleeps deeply on his bed of pine needles and stone, his mind processing the thousands of astronomical verses and herbal formulas drilled into his brain during 15 hours of relentless mental discipline. And in his gilded Italian palace, the Renaissance prince tosses fitfully under his silk covers, the hard iron rings of his chainmail shirt digging into his ribs while his personal bodyguard keeps watch over the untouched flask of tested water. Back in the royal bedchamber, the first subtle signs of morning begin to manifest. The deep blackness outside the leaded glass windows softens into a cool slate gray. Down in the courtyard below, the heavy wooden gates groan open, and the faint sounds of the day's early shift begin to filter upward. The clatter of iron-rimmed wagon wheels, the sharp chop of the woodcutter's axe, preparing firewood for the grand kitchens, and the distant muffled shouting of the master cooks, organizing the morning slaughter of cattle and poultry. Inside the room, the hearth fire has finally died down to a faint bed of gray ash. The air has grown noticeably colder, catching in your throat with every breath. You stand up slowly from your pallet, your knees popping loudly in the quiet room. You stretch your stiff, aching muscles, smoothing down your crushed doublet and hose, preparing yourself for the final grueling transition from night watch to morning duty. You step quietly to the window, pulling back a corner of the heavy wool drapes to look out at the mist rising off the Thames River. The morning sun is just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a pale, cold golden light across the stone turrets and manicured gardens. You have survived another full 24 hours in the service of the king. You have navigated the perilous depths of royal waste management, witnessed the brutal realities of Tudor medicine, and held vigil through the dark, paranoid hours of the night. A low, deep groan echoes from inside the velvet bed curtains. King Henry VIII is beginning to wake, his heavy body stirring under the thick feather quilts as the opium syrup fully wears off, and the familiar, burning ache in his leg ulcer returns to greet the morning. You take a deep breath, pick up the silver basin of fresh water, step toward the four-poster bed, and gently pull back the velvet curtains to greet the king, and begin the cycle all over again. As the morning light fills the room, and the king swings his legs over the side of the bed, our journey through these strange, dirty, and fascinating corridors of history finally comes to a gentle close. It is time for you to let go of the Tudor court, the Egyptian desert, the Gaulish forests, and the paranoid Italian banquets. Pull the blankets up around your shoulders and let your body sink deeply into the soft warmth of your mattress. Your modern bed is safe, comfortable, and completely free from cold river drafts, toxic sleep potions, and hidden daggers. You don't have to analyze royal waste, wade through muddy bogs for leeches, memorize 20,000 verses of ancient law, or sleep in a steel chainmail shirt. Allow your breathing to slow down to a deep, peaceful rhythm. Inhale the quiet comfort of the night, and exhale all the tension and fatigue from your day. The worries of the waking world are fading away, leaving behind only the calm, still darkness of deep, restful sleep. Sleep comfortably, close your eyes, and rest easy tonight. Good night.